welcome. My name is Heidi Dix and I am the co-chair of the BASW England Criminal Justice Group alongside Caroline Bald, who has sent her apologies because she's unable to be with us today. So thank you all for joining us. We've got a big range of people in the room. Feel free to introduce yourselves because some people are part of the criminal justice group and some people are not. If you are interested in joining the formal BASW criminal justice group, then please do contact Wayne and myself because we're always welcoming new members and or people with lived experience. So please do that. So usual etiquette applies. So if you've attended these sessions before, it will be recorded and hosted on the BASW YouTube channel. If you are new to this space, there is a whole brilliant host of resources from previous kind of webinars that we have undertaken. And so please do view those if you get an opportunity. Feel free to have your cameras on. It is being recorded, as I said, so if that's difficult for you, then please switch your cameras off and participate in a way that works for you and for others. And I think Wayne's just popped himself in the chat, so absolutely please feel free. I'm not going to do introductions because we haven't got a huge amount of time and time is precious. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce Keith. Keith is going to say a bit about some high-level themes, really, in relation to the work of the Youth Justice Board, and then we will have our invite questions from yourselves. So feel free to pop those in the chat if need be, or we'll use the usual remit in terms of putting hands up. So Wayne and I will be monitoring that as we go. So a bit about Keith Fraser. Welcome, Keith. Keith, in April 2020, was appointed as chair of the Youth Justice Board, and prior to that, he was a board member. Keith, like many of us in this day and age, wears lots of hats. So he's also the non-executive director trust for the National at the Workforce Development Trust Limited. He's also an advisor for the National Police Chiefs Council Digital Engagement Project for Young People and patron for the Employability UK. And prior to this, many of you will know that Keith has a police background. So he was the superintendent and chief inspector in the West Midlands Police, having joined as a constable. And during this time, he produced the 2016 to 19 Preventing Gang Involvement and Youth Violence strategy. Keith also produced the business plan for the City of Wolverhampton Council, where he was chair of the authority's youth, which is now called Youth Justice Management Board. I imagine back then, Keith, it was the Youth Offending Management Board, which obviously is has a statutory function. He led an innovative prevention project targeting 7,000 children and young adults, working collaboratively with Sport England, and was the strategic police lead for the Prince's Trust across the West Midlands. So welcome, Keith. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Heidi and Wayne. I think this invitation has been a long time coming. I think it's one I should have accepted quite a while ago. We should have accepted this a while ago. And thank you very much for that summary. I suppose with my career in and around public services, I really do recognise, not in just this role, but also my previous role, the protective service role that social work provides in general. So that was the point I really wanted to make right at the outset, as I see yourselves as a protective service. And I think that link with what you do and also with youth justice could perhaps be strengthened, and we can have a conversation there to see how that is probably stronger locally than it is nationally. And so is there something more that we could be doing nationally around that? And then throughout my previous life, in policing, I worked an awful lot with social workers. Social workers are often my companions when I was going out for particular things that I had to do previously. So from an operational perspective and also strategic perspective, obviously a lot of what social work does. So I do thank the British Association of Social Work for the invitation. And I think it's, for what I would like to get out of today is have a bit of a discursive. I'll set a kind of high-level overview, I suppose, in relation to some kind of key themes, and then we'll explore them in a little bit more detail. But also want to, in particular, touch on our approach around equity, prevention and system reform in relation to youth justice. Just in relation to the Youth Justice Board, just for a very, very brief overview, we're a non-departmental body, so that's something that's been set up by government, but we are independent of government in relation to how we operate. We provide oversight and an evidence-based approach to how we do it, and also system leadership. And we're absolutely committed to supporting the system to improve. We really want to make sure that we focus on better outcomes for children, and we believe, and the evidence shows us, that if you focus on better outcomes for children, then that enables us to have fewer victims and also safer communities. And we have a statutory duty to promote and prevent best practice around preventing offending. And I think that there's more that needs to be done in that space, and the evidence will show there's more needs to be done in that space, despite the fact that that part of the system, I think, is very well performing. But there are some challenges, and perhaps we can touch on that in a little bit more detail. I think there's a strong alignment between our vision of what we're trying to achieve and social work. First of all, if you talk about the Child First framework, which is based on evidence about what works around seeing children as children, diverting children from stigma, building a pro-social identity, and collaborating with children. I feel there's a strong alignment with social work values in relation to being trauma-informed practice, relational approaches, safeguarding, and intervention at the earliest point. And also another crossover theme is around the emphasis on education, well-being, and strengths-based approach. It's also something which, for me, and it's also a topic which is one of the questions, is around tackling racial disparities and inequities in the justice system, and in particular in the youth justice system. And one of the things I wanted to acknowledge from the outset is the disparity and overrepresentation from an ethnicity or minoritized community perspective has been a persistent challenge for the justice system. But just because it's been a persistent challenge doesn't mean it's something that we can't do something about. And I just wanted to highlight you some of the statistics that sit behind that. But also, it won't be lost on you the fact this is people also that we are talking about, and some of the statistics might not reflect everybody's experience of the justice system. Black children make up 19% of stop and searches where the ethnicity was known, but that's 13 percentage points higher than their share of the population when you're looking at that kind of 10 to 17 bracket, which is at 6%. Black and mixed heritage children each accounted for 11 and 10% respectively of all the children that were cautioned and sentenced, despite each group making up only 6% of the population. The proportion of first-time entrants who were black increased from 11% in 2013 to 15% in 2023, showing a persistent overrepresentation in the last decade. 31% of proven offences by black children had a high gravity matrix score of between 5 to 8, and that's out of 8 in relation to how we score that, compared with 16% of white children, indicating a disproportionality in relation to the seriousness of offences recorded. Black children continue to be disproportionately remanded and sentenced to custody, even for similar offences, reflecting a pattern that we've seen in similar years. Despite the reductions that we've seen in absolute numbers, black and mixed heritage children remain overrepresented across most stages of the youth justice system, including stop and search, cautions, sentencing, custody, and also reoffending. Although in the last 4 years we have seen a reduction in all of those areas in relation to black children, particularly black boys. What we're talking about here as well with, I think, and the evidence will show, is it's based on structural inequalities and not necessarily deficits in the individual. So what I'm not here to do, and what I'm sure you show the evidence will support, it's not about saying there's deficits in the individual that are driving that over representation that you have. It's around the structural inequalities that there are within the system, and that's where I really do feel the challenge needs to happen, is further up the system, outside of the youth justice system, as well as looking at what's happening within the justice system when those kids and those children reach us. We're doing an awful lot of work. I lead from a youth justice board perspective, and I think it's critical that somebody from the top actually leads that in relation to over-representation. Now, there's a number of things, activities that we've got ongoing. It's one of our 3 priorities for the Youth Justice Board. We're at the moment developing an anti-racism strategy. We're doing work to look at further insights into over-representation. And we want to find out what works as well, because we know about the challenges, but we do want to start to focus as well as really understanding what's happening in the system, find out what's working, or what could work in the future. So we're going to be funding and are funding a pathfinder in the West Midlands to address racial disparity. I think that in relation to how we achieve success in this area, it's through partnership, local leadership and shared accountability. And I'd really look for your support around how do we change systemic challenges that we have within this area and systemic barriers, which then leads this over-representation. I think that the youth justice system has a crucial role to play in relation to changing the direction of children's lives. And I say unfortunately, because what happens quite often is that a number of the children, the system and the youth justice system, although performing extremely well, there's a high concentration of children with a number of complex needs. And quite often the first time those needs are picked up is when they touch the justice system. And that's not necessarily if they become part of the secure estate, it's just coming into contact with the system. And then it's at that point that they're often asked the question, what's happening? Why is this happening to you? And the number of children that I speak to that say that's the first time anybody's shown they've cared is when they've touched the justice system. For me, that's quite a sad indictment on what's happened before. If you look at Scotland, there's quite a bit potentially we can learn from Scotland around ending custody for children, and looking at what they've done in relation to moving away from young offenders institutes. At the Youth Justice Board, we don't believe that the current model is fit for purpose around young offenders institutes, and we really do want to explore more community-based therapeutic models of care around children that are in custody. And I really do want to emphasise that what we don't want to do is have children who at the extreme go into custody and come out exactly the same, if not exactly the same, come out worse with more vulnerabilities than they had when they come in. We need to have a system that from the second it touches, those children touch that system, in particular the secure estate, it's really focused on constructive resettlement. So you're thinking about care over custody. It's absolutely critical that we've got that, and evidence will support that. And also, we need to think about real preventative interventions. And then moving on to how children are treated and what's happening within the custody arena. I know that the use of PAVA is particularly of interest to yourself in the custody estate. And again, as I said, we are independent of government, and a lot of the conversations that we have with government are behind the scenes, whether it be something that we think is positive about the system or whether or not we think is challenging. But on this system, on this particular issue, I and the rest of the board have chosen to go public on this matter, because we have had a number of conversations about it. So what I would like to say in relation to parva is that the Youth Justice Board does not support the use of parva spray in youth custody. The evidence will show it's harmful for children, and it's not backed by evidence that it improves safety. Our evidence-based advice, we did provide that advice to government, and it's unambiguous that parva does not reduce violence, nor does it help in relation to preventing offending or re-offending. In fact, it could cause more harm. We haven't seen any evidence to justify the decision to introduce it to the secure estate, and we've highlighted that the current model around youth custody is failing. Another additional point in relation to that as well is that there's, on evidence would show that there is a concern that parva could be disproportionately used against black boys and children from other ethnic minority backgrounds, and also those who have communication needs and those who are neurodivergent. So we have concerns on a number of levels. Then when you think about the relationship that the children should be having with those that are looking after them whilst in the secure estate, we believe that it could erode trust and the relationships, and that undermines safety and rehabilitation. What we'd ask for is that the government invests in real reform around this, better trained staff in relation to working with children in that environment, effective behaviour management, and also evidence-based safety programmes. In relation to secure estate, we'd advocate a shift to smaller local units led by specialist trained staff to support children with their complex needs, in units that are prioritised around education and reintegration, helping children to thrive, and the other part of that is around and around communities being safer then as a result. What I've seen throughout my life around public service is that children can do bad things, but children are not inherently bad or bad people, and also that children can change. And I've seen overwhelming evidence of that throughout the whole of my service, whether it be as a police officer or in the number of national roles that I do now. So I think the system should reflect that, really, and we should really be focused on how do we support children to change and not punish. That really does not work, and the evidence does not support that. I want to thank you all for the roles that you do out there. It's not an easy job that you do out there in relation to changing people's lives for the positive, and also challenging injustices. And I'd really welcome your thoughts on what I've said, and also some wider questions, and also how you think we can work together in the future. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Keith. Lots there for us to discuss there. So I'm just going to ask if anyone has any questions, because I know Keith is really keen to invite those. Whilst we're doing that, I'm going to take the chair's privilege, really, and just ask a couple. And one is a comment and potentially a question, Keith, while people are thinking about that. I guess I was interested in certainly around you welcoming, strengthening the links between social work and youth justice, and really thinking about what that could look like nationally. And I do think that's a conversation for another day, so I won't take up too much time here. But I definitely think there's something around, and I know I've spoken to colleagues around strengthening social work's presence at the board, and potentially linking into the chief social worker around that, and also drawing on the expertise of BASW in relation to that. So there's some initial things I think can be done fairly quickly, actually, to then move forward on that. there was something there as well. And I'm just going to come back to, because you've been very vocal, Keith, and we're really fortunate that you're with us today around that over-representation of certain groups of children. That was one of the first things I think that I noticed about you when you moved into that role. And you were saying lots of things very openly at that time. And I guess I'm interested in what recent change have you seen? Because I think many of us acknowledge, as you did, that there are some things that we can change within the youth justice system, but actually lots of this happens before children encounter us, really, and certainly in terms of work within youth justice services. So I wondered if there was anything that you have noticed or want to comment on in terms of recent positive change that you've seen in relation to children overrepresented, particularly those from ethnic minority groups, because you mentioned that your priorities going forward, and I guess I also wanted to acknowledge some change. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely does make some sense. I don't say this to avoid the issue. Hopefully, you know that a number of you are probably extremely experienced in the public sector, and the conversations that we are having now weren't being had so long ago. They were with a tighter, smaller group of people who, you know, cared passionately about the children that we are talking about and the overrepresentation. I suppose one of the things that we are now able to do and able to do better, although I think there's more that we can do, is we're able to challenge more about what we're doing. So although some people might say, you know, stop looking, we know what's happening, we know what's not working, we still, if we're going to have those difficult conversations, they're not always easy conversations, we need to have the evidence to have those conversations. So, and also, I also don't think the monitoring is where it needs to be. I know, sorry, you said to me to focus on the positives. I'm just kind of showing the converse at the same time, really. But we need to have that evidence to have those conversations. And I'm able to have some quite difficult conversations behind the scenes, because I can say, why is it that children in the same circumstances, you're getting these different outcomes once you're making decisions about their lives and what should happen to them. And so increasingly what you're getting is different parts of the system being prepared to have a look at that. You've also, in the areas that, you know, although where we're at the moment around disproportionality is still not good, in relation to the 4 areas that I mentioned earlier, the last four years, they have been reducing. Now, what I can't say is I don't fully understand exactly why that's happening. But what I can see is that you've got an increased focus on a child first approach across the system. So looking at children as children, I can talk to the 4 elements around child first approach in a little bit more detail if that's helpful. You've got a number of organisations like, you know, the police, for example, have, through the Police and Crime Commissioners and also locally through respective services, have access through our disproportionality toolkit. That is enabling some difficult conversations to take place internally. We actually have it. The Youth Justice Board, as part of the things that we look at all the youth justice services on, is their commitment to actually reducing and tackling overrepresentation. And also I can see a lot more conversations talking about, when you're looking at justice, not just thinking about it from that child being a risky thing. We are really looking at children as children, trying to understand why the children in those circumstances. So a more individualised, evidence-based approach. So there seems to be a lot more in relation to how we start to focus on evidence, looking at children and what needs to be done, rather than looking at behaviour, just the behaviour and then responding to the behaviour. We need to be looking behind that and seeing what's driving that behaviour. And obviously there's some tactical things that I could talk about as I've seen as well.
Great, very comprehensive answer, Keith. And you'd answered, I was going to say, what recent change have we seen and what still needs to happen? And you kind of touched on both of those. So thank you. Brian, did you want to come in there?
Thank you, Heidi. And thank you, Keith, for your time today and your thoughts from all of your experience. And yeah, thank you for all the work you're doing for the types of values that you're talking about there. So a comment and a question, if I may, please. And the comment is about in terms of how young people might see us all working in the system, if we can put it like that. I had a real interest over the years in restorative justice and done various projects on that. And one of those was in relation to the Restorative Justice Council a few years ago. And we were looking at why young people from black minority ethnic groups don't take up the offer of restorative justice as much as they might. Actually, I think that's true for all young people, and I think there's an awful lot more we can do about restorative justice, because I believe there's a real place for it, including in the youth offender referral panels, which I've been sitting on for a number of years, and issues around restorative justice and victims' voice within all that. That's maybe another matter another time, but what we found in that research project, with talking with those young people from those communities, two things struck out for me. One was they said, don't use the word justice, because for us, justice means going to prison. And they also said, don't ask the police to offer it to us, because we don't trust the police. So those have really stuck with me over the last 7 or 8 years since we did that, as about listening to young people's voices. I also do work around co-production, but mainly the mental health areas these days. And it's always struck me that because of the way lots of agencies and maybe society see young offenders, they're almost seen as not being worthy of including from their views and experiences. So that was the comment. And the question, Keith, please, is about, and it may be, there's a lot going on from the Youth Justice Board and others, about including young people's views in what works for them or not, please. Thank you. That went on a bit, sorry.
Definitely didn't go on a bit, and a lot of what you said chimed with me. Some of it I'm there with you on to a certain extent, and some of it I'm not, and I'm prepared to kind of go and talk, and talk a little bit more detail on that. I think the one thing where I think we're totally aligned on is how do we include the child's voice and children's voice in relation to all of this, and this is where the law is kind of out of step with the evidence around maturation, because you should be looking at under 25s, and that all young people under that age should be treated differently as a distinct group. But that creates a whole host of issues and challenges for the system. But where we're at is that, and what we're really driving and supporting is that all children under the age of 18, I know that not all of them want to be called children, young people under the age of 18 are viewed as children. So regardless of how the state comes into contact with them, whether it be through, and excuse the broad brush, through the welfare route or through the justice route, they are looked at as children in the first instance. And I think it's absolutely critical, and this is where the child first framework is absolutely vital if we're going to have significant change in the system, is that you treat children as children. And then that approach in itself is developmentally led, so it's where that child is at. And then secondly, there's a real focus on pro-social development rather than trying to tackle the criminogenic factors. You're looking at how do you support that child in relation to identity change and where they see themselves in society, and how can you support them on that journey. Because by doing that, you're then supporting them for better outcomes, because we've got to move past just stopping offending. It's not about that. For me, it's about how do you produce better, a better life for that child. So it's one step on, really. And then through that, you'll have safer communities and also safe and fewer victims. And I do really want to play on that point as well, because when we talk about child first, some people might think, oh, we're forgetting about communities, we're forgetting about victims. We're not. What we're talking about is an evidence-based way in order to have better outcomes for children, and also fewer victims, and also safer communities. So we have to be really challenging and quite robust around that. And then the third element around that is around collaboration. So what you're doing is around any intervention that you have with a child and young person, they need to be involved, they need to be part of that conversation. whatever it is, whether it's a preventative intervention, or if you're looking at resettlement, or you're looking at providing a service within the community, it's how do you get their voice. And then finally, the last part of that is doing all that we can to keep them out of the justice system, because we know that once children touch the justice system, they are more likely to come back in. And also we know the stigma that's attached with that makes it harder for children to move on with their lives and develop in their lives. And the points I kind of, do agree with you about as well, why we need to have not a different approach, but be cognizant of it, around black children from minoritized backgrounds, is around the different levels of trust that you have within different communities. We can't ignore that. That is a fact. In order to move things on and support children, we need to have adults around them that they trust. So your job, my job, and those that are out there is very difficult, because we've got to try and develop that trust with the children so that we can work with them. So that is where I wouldn't come. I'm not one of these people who would say a blanket no to police or to anybody else kind of administrating that, because the number of children that I've spoken to have said the police officer is the first person that actually showed them any care, or they've actually asked them what's happened. So it's about being cognizant of what you've said, but us as professionals trying to work through that. So that trust element is absolutely critical. So how the onus is on us to develop those trusted relationships. And then also the piece that you said around restorative justice, that is about how both parties feel involved in that, the child and also the victim / survivor feel that they are willingly involved in that process as it goes along. And I can give you some examples of that as well. I'm sure you've got some really good examples of how that works.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. And I guess just picking up on that theme whilst we're waiting for anyone else who has any questions, it was the Alliance for Youth Justice. You were there, Keith. I think it was last week, wasn't it? Their AGM. And they were making the point, I think, about actually we know, picking up what you were saying, Brian, about what children want. Children have been saying the same thing for many, many years, and that is they want trusted adults and safe spaces. So I guess thinking about that and linking in, I wondered if you've got any comments or reflections, Keith, or can share anything with us around link to government policy, really. I know you're independent from government, but whether there was anything there in terms of the government spelled out in their manifesto around their real focus on prevention and in localised provision and spoke about young futures, and we haven't really heard much detail about that. So I wondered if there was anything you could share, link to the idea of what children are saying. They want those safe adults and they want those trusted spaces and trusted adults.
Well, what I can say at the moment, so you can see there's a particular drive from the government around that in relation to their missions. One, it's really positive to see that. I think it comes under the safer streets part of the government's missions around, and their approach around how they're looking to achieve safer streets is through those prevention hubs and also through the youth futures. So the prevention partnerships, the youth futures hubs. So and it's through those. What we're looking at now is to see what that looks like in detail around how that's going to operate and who's going to be part of that delivery. Now we're doing the best that we can to make sure that we're part of that conversation. So that the top level and high level aspiration matches what they're actually trying to deliver on the ground, and it really is focused on what works. Because I think the challenge would be around something like this is that the strategic objective or strategic intent that you have at that government level is then not matched by what you actually see on the ground. So our job at the moment is very much trying to influence what the conversation being had in the Home Office, within DfE, and also the MOJ, around Ministry of Justice, around what that should look like. So I'm heartened, and I genuinely mean that, heartened by the focus the challenge for me will be is what does that now look like in practice? And it's not out there in practice. That's why that practice bit might sound a little bit sketchy, because it's not out there yet.
Thank you. And I guess again, you were speaking to a bunch of social workers, Keith. So we would advocate very strongly for the role of social work within those prevention hubs. O'Shea, question.
Hi Keith, thank you for your presentation. It's really, really informative. I just wanted to ask, obviously, I know we've kind of highlighted the current youth custody estate isn't fit for purpose, and obviously there have been new initiatives that have kind of come out in like the last year or so around the Secure School and the London Accommodation Pathfinder programme, and I just wanted to kind of understand the YJB's view on those projects, and actually if they see any benefit on building those projects, because smaller units, more therapeutically minded. So I just wanted to know if that was kind of on the discussion amongst board members and things.
Yeah, before the Secure School was actually built, we were privately and also publicly championing the approach around secure schools. I'll talk about it from a kind of a high level approach, something which I kind of touched on, was we do believe that you should have smaller units closer to children's homes where they live, so that you can actually provide that therapeutic care for children, which is really focused on resettlement and not picking up on some of the elements of how the adult estate is operated and then just overlaying those into the children. So you have a real discrete difference to how children are supported in that environment. And I do use the word supported deliberately as well. The other part of it as well is around education as well. Education is an absolutely critical part of that, and making sure that children have education. Often when they come into the secure estate, it's a sad fact, an indictment on the system, that's the first time quite often that they've had any kind of structured education. Now, what we need to make sure is that happens consistently, that education within the secure estate, and not because they're in the secure estate, it's not at the right standard for them as well. So we've got to make sure that we're not having our own biases as well around how we look at the type of education that children should receive in the secure estate. So very much behind the secure schools. It's what I would say is a high risk, high reward project. It's new. It's a discrete piece which is really different to anything else which is out there. So there are likely to be some mistakes happening in the early days, and so my concern would be is if things go wrong, that we lose our courage in relation to seeing this through. So that's the thing for me, is how do we support the learning of a different approach? And that model as a secure estate as it might be, some people might say it's too large how it is at the moment, but what I would say is support it on its journey, because it took us long enough to get this thing off the ground once it was agreed. So support it on its journey to see what we can do if we do things differently. And then in relation to the London Accommodation and Resettlement Project, you're probably all aware of this, that nearly 50% of the children that are in the secure estate are on remand. You're looking at about 45% approximately, but then 75% of those that are on remand then don't go on to receive a custodial sentence. So the simple voice in my head is going, why are these children being held securely? Is there another way that the children should be, supported whilst their case is coming up to court? And also in a way it doesn't make it more inevitable for those children to stay in the system, because we know that once children are in the secure estate, they're more likely to come back, and it's harder for them to maintain their place in society. So, that was initially started off by the Youth Justice Board through it's another Pathfinder project, and that is ongoing at the moment. But I think some of the things for me in relation initially, some of the learning for me, I think it's significant learnings around the need for collaboration, because this is being done across a number of local authority areas. And you can't underestimate, I'm sure you won't, the challenge of working across multiple local authority areas and getting the collaborative numbers together to actually deliver that. The number of children in custody are thankfully extremely small. Therefore, some local authorities, and I use the word in inverted commas, are going to benefit more from that service than others. So you've got a challenge there off straight away. Why should I spend my money supporting you? Then you'll have things around governance. You'll also have the piece around the courts trusting that system as somewhere where the children can go. You'll also have making sure you've got the right staff in there. But in principle, I think the idea is right. It's another one of those high risk, high reward projects, which I think we need to really do what we can to see that through. And in Manchester, I don't know if you're aware, they're doing something which is similar but operates in a different way with the same kind of cohort of children.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thanks, Keith. And again, whilst we're waiting for anyone else with any questions, I'm going to do a quick shout out for O'Shea for people to check out in the chat. O'Shea's done lots of research and is we're going to do some further research, aren't we, O'Shea, locally with members in relation to the use of PAVA and the impact of that. And there's a link to her research in the chat. So thank you for that, O'Shea. I just thought I'd make reference to that.
No worries.
And Keith, and there's something there for me, just picking up on the accommodation and the use of remands for children. Back in the day, I used to be part of what we called our remand fostering service. So with children, and that's when we were sending higher numbers of children into custody. But again, I think there's something there about that join up with social work, link to the findings from the pathway that's happening, about thinking about the role of fostering and foster carers within that too. So it's again just something that resonated with me when we're thinking about those links between youth justice and social work.
Anyone? Think we should be,
go on,
sorry Heidi, I do think that we should be thinking about that, and also thinking about when children in custody at police stations as well. Is there sufficiency of that offer for children in relation to alternatives? If you're in custody or if you're looking at children potentially going on remand, and I think there's a real challenge at the moment around that being a real viable opportunity to be considered. One, if a child is in the custody of the police, and also two, if those children are looking to be remanded and the judiciary and magistracy are looking to where that child should be remanded. So I think that's a real viable option. But it's a viable option, but I'm thinking about then the opportunities and who is out there that's actually going to deliver that service at the moment.
And I think it's very localised, isn't it? I think what we see, Keith, is some real innovative work that's very localised, and whether actually we need something which is nationally led. And because it comes down to when you were saying about priorities for different types of children and young people, and then who decides that. So
and that thing around children, I really do want to champion that. Looking at these children as children, because once you start to other children who are in and around the justice system, it's quite easy then for adultification and other biases then to have an impact on your decision making as how that child is viewed. Quite often, some of the children who are the most vulnerable in society are more likely to go through adultification. They are okay. They're okay. They are streetwise. How many people do you hear saying that? I know I used to hear that quite a bit from a number of different professionals that I worked with. Because they are seen to be living a life where it appears that they're able to look after themselves and all the rest of it. They're quite often being exploited behind the scenes by adults, and we should be questioning more, why is a child in that situation whereby that we feel that they're able to cope, not saying okay they're able to cope, because they're always in these circumstances, whether it be somebody who goes missing, somebody repeatedly results in behaviour which might lead to them being excluded. Why is that happening? Why is that happening? What's the thing that's leading to that vulnerability, not othering those children?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's about priorities and links into concepts of deserving and undeserving, doesn't it? Realistically, around that. Yeah, and about children deemed to have much more choices and agency. And I've always really interested in how social work fits into collaboration and co-production, whilst also safeguarding and our roles within that. So yeah, again, that's a conversation for a different day, I think. But interesting in terms of thinking about adultification, because we know that absolutely that affects particular groups of children, doesn't it? Girls being one and black boys being another. And again, thinking about our role, and that's something for us all to think about around how we do or don't inadvertently contribute to that, and how we then also challenge that within ourselves and our own profession and within others. I was just conscious of time. Any more further questions for Keith while he's here? Wayne.
Thanks, Heidi. Thank you, Keith, for your presentation. Really comprehensive and insightful. And it's great to hear that a lot of what the Youth Justice is about and the work that you're involved in and the principles align with the work of BASW and this group as well. My question relates to that, really, and I wondered what your thoughts were on the potential closer links between social justice, youth justice and criminal justice, because there is a sort of fragmentation that's taken place over the last 20 years or so in terms of policy, practice and education. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about the kind of the strengthening, really, of those bridges, or whether you feel that actually the current model is structurally, sort of a better way to work.
Yeah, you might challenge me on this one, but quite often the reasons, not quite often, I've stopped saying that, but the reasons why children end up in different parts of the system is because of the decisions that adults have made, and not necessarily because of what they've done. They're quite often around the child's circumstances. So if we start to say that and we start to look at it, it's not excusing what children do, because sometimes they do things that are wrong, but it is about the understanding as to what our response is in that behaviour. Say, like, for example, if you have a child who is at home and they smash a window at home, is that parent or carer likely to call the police? If you've got a child that's in the care system and who's being looked after in care, is there an increased likelihood that the police might be called and then a different action is taken as a result of that? And then that one decision by the adult has then led to that person coming into contact with the police and the police having to make a decision. You have two young people at home have an argument with each other. The parent carer will deal with that in a particular way. You take it into the same scenario, then into the school setting. So do the school deal with it internally, or do they call the police? There are a number of things that happen whereby we impact on the journey of that child and where they're going to be. So I think a greater understanding that and this it's obvious to you, but it's not always obvious to everybody, that all of these children, they're all children, and it's our decisions that have had a significant impact on their journeys, really. So if we can have a significant impact on them negatively, I think we can have a significant impact on children positively by thinking differently. There was a recent report that just came out from HMI prisons around the importance of trust and how trusted relationships can support rehabilitation, support a safer environment for children, support less self-harm, support less violence. That report only came out about 2 weeks ago. Now, some of the changes that we need to see around how we work with children don't cost money, but it does require a change in thinking. So I think those disciplines that you're talking about, the more aligned we are, the better.
Yeah.
Because there is a challenge in relation to how we operate, and is that kids fall through the gaps sometimes because of different thresholds from different parts of the system. Yeah. So the more joined up the system is, respecting the different disciplines of the system, the more joined up it is, hopefully the less likelihood is that the child will fall through the gaps between the different segments of how we're looking after the children. I think it's how do we get this thing around how we're working around the child rather than working around our policies. Excuse me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So would you agree then that the current emphasis is more on sort of enforcement as opposed to rehabilitation then, and that what we're working towards is that ideological change towards rehabilitation as opposed to managing behaviours, offending behaviours?
Good. I think the drive is moving more towards child first. So if you look, 4 years ago, if you looked, you didn't have, as part of Youth Justice Board, it wasn't our strategy. The Crown Prosecution Service didn't have it as part of their policy. I wasn't having conversations with the judiciary and magistracy around child first. Child-centred policing is something which is adopted. I know of two police services now that have got a child first strategy. All the youth justice services are monitored in relation to how they're delivering around child first.
Yeah.
So at a policy level, that approach is getting better.
Yeah.
We really do need to make sure as well is that operationally people understand what that means in their contact. So for me, it's not always about blaming people, because you're asking people to operate in a different way, and all of these different bits of the system, because one of the conversations I've had, for example, sometimes in policing, is that child first applies to this kind of child but doesn't apply to that kind of child, and it's kind of how to say you can manage risky behaviour in a child first way, not that if you've got to stop risk or stop harm, you stop doing child first. You can still do child first while preventing harm to others.
Yeah, that must be difficult to manage that boundary, and I guess that's where the real tension is. But good to hear that there is that adoption of child first approach, and sounds like it's still in its infancy to some degree, but just great that it's starting to take hold. So thank you. Sylvia, if we could come to you then, and Heidi, I'll hand back to you as well for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Keith. Tremendous presentation. And I suspect that my question is really about what you've just been talking about in terms of child first attitudes. But how do you see the criminalisation of children who've been exploited by adults? I mean, in particular, I suppose, in terms of drug dealing, but also in terms of child sexual abuse.
Again, that's where you need to look behind how a child has come into those circumstances, has come into that position. And I think we are getting better at looking behind what presents rather than just focusing on that behaviour which we're saying is wrong. And we've got to be it's almost like you're dancing on a pinhead, because you're not agreeing with the behaviour, but you're not just focused on that behaviour that you're saying is wrong. You're trying to understand why the child is in that situation, and then as a result of that, responding to that, and not just responding to the behaviour that we're saying is wrong. You're probably aware of the national referral mechanism, which is an approach to support children that will find themselves in those positions where they have been exploited or are being exploited. For me, yes, the idea is good, but that system really does need to speed up. One, in relation to referrals, and also that the service then being delivered for children, because children's lives, they move on so quickly. Once we've lost a couple of days or a couple of weeks in a child's life, it moves on a lot far quicker than, say, like my life does. So the system needs to respond to there's some good ideas out there like the national referral mechanism, but that needs to be responsive to what's actually happening. And we also need to think differently as well, like for lower level drugs possession as well, for example. Is a criminal approach the right way to that? Should we be looking at a health approach, adopting a health approach in relation to that? And I'm not arguing for decriminalisation, but what I am arguing for is around taking a health approach to children that have possession of drugs in certain circumstances.
Fabulous. Thanks, Keith. So just finally, really, just to say thank you on behalf of British Association of Social Work and our Criminal Justice Group and the people here today for your really insightful conversation. We really do appreciate your time and also your willingness really to take cold questions, because we could have given anything to you today and you didn't ask for anything to be pre-approved. So we really just want to acknowledge that and thank you on behalf of the membership for that, and for being really candid in your responses in terms of reflecting on where we have come and also where we need to be in order to support positive outcomes for children, because as you said, that makes safer communities for everybody really. So a big thank you again for your time, and anything that we can do to continue the conversation and to contribute to positive developments, then please do be in touch with Wayne, because I know that the membership are really keen to support and move some of these things forward with you.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and also the questions as well. If there are any questions post this that you kind of think of, I'm quite happy to take them outside of here as well. So I'll leave ourselves open. It'd be just interesting when I'm not in the room for you to have a think around what more it is you think we should be doing together, because you might be a little bit quiet with me sat here listening. So I know that social workers aren't normally quiet, but with some outsider sat here listening, then you might be a little bit quieter. So if there's something that you can kind of think of outside of here, one, questions you wanted to ask and you didn't, and two, how we can work together better, that, then happy to have a conversation post this.
Fabulous. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you,
again,
Keith.
Keith.
So, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.